So welcome again, everyone. It's a beautiful Thursday morning, and my name is Tamika Small, and I am the training consultant here at Tourism Saskatchewan. We're always grateful that you're able to join us for these training moments, I will say. But before we get into the meat of the matter, it's very important that we begin by acknowledging that we are joining today from different parts of the province, which is made up of Treaty 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10 territories, the gathering land of the Indigenous peoples and the home of the Métis. And we do affirm our relationship with the Indigenous peoples of these territory to continue to build on reconciliation as we learn to move forward in our journey together. Now, just a few housekeeping matters. We do want to hear from you throughout the session. And as usual, for those who have been joining us before, we are going to be allotting some times at the back end to answer your questions. But along the conversation, along the presentation, I should say, please put your questions in the chat, or you can utilize the Q&A tab. And then at the end, Tyler will be attending to those questions. So today's webinar, we are going to be focusing on the topic, how to create a content calendar to save time. Consistency is key in tourism marketing, and a content calendar helps you plan ahead, stay organized, and make the most of your efforts. In this session today, you'll gain practical strategies to map out your content, align it with your seasonal trends and tourism goals, and manage your resources more effectively. So by the end of this webinar, it is hoped that you will be equipped with tools to save time, streamline your process, and build a content calendar that drives long-term success. So for today, our presenter is no other than Tyler Babiy, and he is a social media strategist and content creator with more than a decade of experience supporting tourism organizations across Saskatchewan and beyond. As the owner of T-Square Social, Tyler specializes in content strategy and training, bringing a creative yet highly organized approach that helps teams streamline their work and achieve results. I do know that we're going to be having a great informational session with Tyler. So with no further ado, I'm just going to be handing the rest of the morning over to Tyler. And Tyler, it's over to you.
Well, first of all, thanks everyone for joining. I really love working with tourism folks and Tourism Saskatchewan. We've done a lot of great work in the past, so I'm excited to be speaking on this topic. I'm going to share my screen so everyone can see what we're looking at. So I'm just going to dig right into the matter at hand here and get to talking about content calendars. I feel like content calendars is a really fundamental piece of how you organize social media. I feel like I've talked about it for 10 years, and I was like maybe 15% surprised that this was the topic that we wanted to talk about today, but I do recognize how fundamental it is. So I am excited to go through and help people either refresh or learn for the first time what this process looks like. So what we're going to be looking at in this webinar today is sort of 4 core areas of content calendars. So first, we're going to be looking at how to identify content pillars, and I'll dig into that when we get there. Then we're going to look at how to physically map out a month of content. But we also need to know and understand what a month of content looks like in relationship to an annual plan. Especially with tourism, because inside of tourism, we're every business is to a degree affected by weather, but tourism especially has more seasonality to it, especially if you've got any aspect of your business that's reliant on outdoor spaces, which most tourism does. And then the fourth piece is resource management. So I think having a plan that doesn't respect whether you're like a one person organization or a 12-person organization doesn't really equate to a plan to me. So the last part that we're going to look at is how do we take all of this learning and apply it to different types of situations depending on how many people you have, what approval processes need to look like, that type of thing. I feel like I saw a comment. If anything of urgence, oh, just good morning. Perfect. If
Me,
anything of importance
Tyler.
comes up, you just flag me, okay, Tamika? Okay, so we're going to talk about identifying content pillars. So, content pillars, I like to break content pillars into three main categories. This is a very basic breakdown of content pillars. And the reason I do it this way is because if you don't have these three core pieces, oftentimes people will focus on one piece and then they kind of don't have a whole picture. So the three pieces that I work on, the first one, which I've represented with an apple, is called core ideas. So your core ideas is all of the sort of meat and potato information, the 101 information. This is information that if somebody knows nothing about what you do or who you are, where you are, this is all of that information. I know for us, when we're in a situation or when we've worked with an organization for, 5, 10, 20 years, these things feel like they're not important because we're like, who doesn't know this? Who doesn't know, where this is located or, what our history is or whatever. And the reality is most people don't. So the core ideas is the least sexy, but it's arguably the most important. You'll notice on the bottom, I have written moderate CTAs. CTA stands for call to action. So when we're talking about a core idea, typically on a post that has a core idea pillar, you would have a moderate call to action. And your call to action is basically what you're asking people to do or where you're guiding them next on their customer journey. On a core idea, your call to action is usually somewhere in the middle between like a strong or a soft. Um, yeah. So big picture is the second category, which I've represented with a banana. I'm not sure why. So this is really the DNA of your brand. So this is where we explore the philosophy of your brand, maybe some of the history of your brand, maybe some of the reasons why your experience, your tourism attraction exists, right? Like, what is sort of that, like, the guts of what it is that you're doing? So, the big picture stuff can be a little sexier than the core ideas. So, people sometimes get lost a little bit in big picture and then forget to reflect back on some of their core ideas. The thing with big picture as well, because oftentimes big picture might come into how you're supporting the community or maybe special initiatives you're working on. And so those things, you can have a soft or no call to action because as long as the big picture pillars are being combined with others, you don't always need every post or every piece of content to have an ask on it. Um, so that's where big picture comes in. Timely, I have aptly represented with an avocado because we all know avocados are good for about 3 hours. Um, so this is a mix of calendar holidays and then important dates for your organization that might have some urgency. So this could be, early bird pricing. This could be events. This could be anything that really is attached to a calendar date. And this is something that we learn a little bit more about as we start planning things annually, because that's where the timely stuff we can start planning out. Especially if, say, for example, you're like a summer only attraction, and we know that we need to promote that, but that happens more into the spring. But in the spring, things don't really look summery. So, knowing some of your timely pillars is really important. So, This is what an example of content pillars could look like. So if, let's say, we're an organization and we decide we want to have five posts in one cycle, and we're going to have two that are our basics, two that are our philosophy and big picture, and then one that's about timely. So this could look like one of those posts is about hours and location. Maybe you're a trickier to get to spot and people always get lost getting there. There could be one that has visitors and infos and maybe reviews that link back to more core knowledge. So then your two other posts could be maybe about impacting community, history and education. And then our fifth piece could be a more timely one that relates back to events and launches. So this is what a really basic content pillar example could look like. You may have more posts in a month. You might be doing, 5 posts a week. You might be doing one post a week. It depends on your capacity. But this is sort of how things break out from within that structure. So it's really important to know your audience. I'm not going to dig really deep into this, but I just want to touch on this because with tourism, it is so experiential that it's important that we understand who we're talking to and we understand what we're talking about. So I always say be specific. So don't always talk in generalizations. I know sometimes we're going to be talking about things a little more broadly or using more evergreen type of content, but try to find ways that you can connect with people on emotion and experience, because those are the things that people are going to find a little more sticky, and that's the stuff that people remember a bit more. I also tell people to be self-aware, understand the tone of your content. Something that you believe is common knowledge is for sure going to be new for somebody else. And then be relatable. When you're speaking to people, you want to stay grounded. And I think this is a choice too. This is a branding choice. Some people's brand, they're going to want to stay very relatable. Other people, you might want to position yourself more as an expert. But even when you're positioning yourself as an expert, the question is, are you an expert who's, in the garden helping someone learn how to plant a seed? Or are you the professor at the front of the room, right? So even being an expert, there's different levels of relatability that you can be choosing to incorporate into your content and your branding. So that's sort of like just a really brief snapshot on maybe tone and knowing your audience. So I want to talk about mapping out a month of content. I know it might sound simple for me to say, hey, let's come up with a few things we can talk about, and then we'll just talk about them. So I really want to get pragmatic here and look at how is it that we take some of that information and actually map it out into a month of content. So there's 4 different types of content on a very basic level that we can be working with. So the first type of content is photography. If you're in tourism, hopefully you have good photography because most tourism attractions are quite heavily based on visuals. So photography is the most versatile content. You can repurpose it in so many ways. You can recolor it. You can make it black and white and throw graphics on top. There's a lot of stuff you can do with photos. Building a strong content library, whether you're finding content through either stock photography or you're creating your own content, it's really good to have a library of content. It's also really important to have that library of content seasonally, because oftentimes we're promoting things before things look a certain way. Video is the second type of content. So video is really the best way to build trust, the quickest way to build trust. It also has the highest return, but it is also arguably the most time consuming and the most expensive to create. So when we're creating video content, we definitely want to make sure that these are really aligned. And I think with video content too, I would push people to trying to get things a little bit more into that evergreen type of space so that people can be working a little bit more with content that's going to build and last a little longer. So our third category is shared content. So shared content is really anything that you're not creating, but that you have access to posting and reposting. So this is anything that could be third party. So things that you're getting maybe from like people sending in to you. So that could be through photo contests, that could be through a hashtag. This could be through collabs. Maybe you've worked with different influencers. This could also be through articles, maybe even featured in the news. So this is any content that you didn't have to make that you can use. This is great because it's connected to different things, and so there's that piece where you're able to like share things a little bit more organically and get a bit more organic reach, but you don't have as much control over when you get shared content, unless of course you're working with a collaborator. And then the last one is graphics. So graphics and templates have the lowest engagement, but they have the highest impact. So what I mean by that is saying, typically when you post a graphic, most people generally aren't gonna share that graphic unless it's something, tied to a contest or something that's a really important announcement. Um, but it does get the message across a lot quicker, right? So if there's something maybe like a notice of a closure or something that you need people to just understand quickly, a graphic will get the message across the quickest. But I wouldn't anticipate it going viral. It's more of an efficiency thing. They're also the easiest to make. So once you kind of assess sort of what all your different types of content look like, you can then start matching them up to all of your different ideas for your content pillars. So this really is an exercise in capacity, right? So if you have more capacity, you may end up assigning video content to more of your pillars. If you don't, you might be leaning a little bit more heavily into photo and graphics. And if you have strong community partners or collaboration partners, you may or may not have more pieces assigned to shared content. Say, for example, if you have a really strong group of folks that are constantly tagging, photos of your destination. You could even have a series where you're sharing one of those photos once a week or whatnot. So that's a piece of shared content that you'd be able to count on in your content calendar and plan for. If you don't have that resource, shared content is going to be a little tougher to work that way. So this is what a calendar could look like. For me personally, I like to pick, a couple days of the week. So if I'm posting twice a week, maybe it's a Tuesday and a Friday. If I'm posting 3 times a week, depending on the industry, it could be like a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. This is a little bit more organic. So in something like this is where we're sort of pulling all the ideas together, right? So in a calendar like this, we've taken a look and said, okay, we've got an event at the beginning, we've got an event at the middle of the month, and we've got a facility maintenance closure at the end. So we're going to take some different types of pillars combined with the types of content that we want to use, and we're going to combine those and team those up with what we know is happening in our calendar. Again, you don't have to be quite as organic as this. You could have it more structured on certain days of the week. But this is a way that a calendar could and should look. Um, Again, yeah, working around holidays, but also professional dates that apply to your organization. So for the annual content calendar view and planning, I think the key for me is um, I think we're executing by month, but we're planning by year. So when we're talking about executing things annually, we really want to be aware of what's happening all year so that can inform what we're working on per month. So the key things that we want to be thinking about here are when we're doing our content planning, we're really questioning things like what is the frequency of the content that we want to be doing? Everyone's going to have a different level of frequency. I think if you're really going by, say, what like Instagram or the algorithm is suggesting you do, You maybe opt to posting more frequently. In in my opinion, good content is good content, and consistency is much better than having a lot of content. So sort of quality over quantity is best. So if your organization is only capable of putting out, 2 or 3 posts a week, I would focus on getting 2 or 3 really great posts and then maybe supplementing with some stories, rather than trying to kill yourself to keep up with, daily posts. Unless, of course, you have the time for that and maybe your industry, you're really focused on maybe like a 3 or 4 month window, and then you really want to go hard for those months. You may want to invest differently and then post differently during your off season. And so again, frequency can change depending on the seasonality of your business. Then, we think about platforms. So there are a lot of different platforms. Ultimately, people, will talk about, well, there's which platform is, cool, which one's not. A lot of it comes down to your demographic. So I think, when we're looking at what platforms we want to invest in, we have to be really mindful that they don't all work the same, right? So posting on TikTok is not going to be the same as posting on LinkedIn, but also both of those platforms service very different audiences, and you could theoretically have messaging on both. But ultimately, when you do add another platform, unless you're working within the Meta ecosphere, and you're working sort of say between like Instagram and Facebook, to a degree you can cross post. I mean, you can physically cross post on those and you can just shoot things across both platforms. But you should be making a few changes, even if that's just removing some of the hashtags or making sure that your app mentions are appropriate for both, because not all organizations' app mentions are the same across platforms. I think the main thing with platforms is every time you add a platform, you're effectively adding another post. So it's not always just copy and paste. A lot of times, adding more platforms does mean that you're going to have to reformat, potentially reformat some of the sizes of your photos and videos. For sure, reformat a little bit of like how your text is going to look, because it should be tailored a little bit more for each platform. So knowing where you want to have your content is a big key into understanding how much time you're going to have to put in. So I do want to touch a little bit on real-time content. So I think oftentimes people have the misconception that real-time content, so this is anything around like events or um, anything that would happen in real time. People sometimes think that this stuff just gets kind of winged, or that people just kind of throw an event and then they kind of document it and it's all good. But I think it's really important to have a plan going into real time content. And I think it's also really important to understand that if you're planning for real time content in your content calendar, you may not have those assets that you can physically schedule into your calendar. But when you get to that real time content, you've carved out a space in your calendar so that it's not competing with other scheduled content, unless, of course, you want to complement it with scheduled content, which you may. So I like to go through a list when I'm doing live events, and live events could be anything live. It could be just, a family event. It could be a speaking event. It could be an educational event. It could be some sort of a workshop, anything that basically you want to be documenting as it's happening. So when we're doing live event coverage, you want to consider a few things. Because live events are already tricky enough just to manage the logistics of most events, because there's a lot going on. You have a lot of moving pieces. So going into that and handing a phone to someone and saying, just make it look cool, isn't really a plan to me. So I always like to help people understand a few key things. So what is your event timeline? When are things happening? What time are things happening? When are things ending? When are things, going to be maybe like different things happening that you want to capture? What time are things ending? And yeah, so understanding your event timeline is really important, specifically for the person creating content for your event. Um, Identifying people of importance. Is there anyone that's going to be at this event that needs to be captured in content? So, is there the Minister of Tourism going to be there? Is there someone of importance, maybe a key speaker or someone who's really cool in your industry that you want to make sure is in some photographs, right? Again, this could be common knowledge to you, but if you're handing this off to someone who maybe is, I don't know, a summer student or whoever, they just might not have that inside knowledge. So make sure they're on the same page as you. The third thing on your checklist should be key events and highlights. Is anything happening during the event or the day or the week or the festival that is a key event that you want captured? Or do you just want more generalized photos of maybe crowd stuff, or maybe there's like a marketplace happening, you just want it to like look busy? Um, if there's key events and highlights, make sure they're outlined for whoever's getting the content. The fourth thing is content type. What are you wanting to get out of this content? Are you hoping for video content? Are you hoping for photo content? Are you hoping for a mix of both? And what are you hoping to get in terms of like, I'd say those key events or those people of importance? Are you wanting an audio bite from that person of importance? Or are you just wanting a cool photo of them maybe standing with a few people from the tourism attraction? Understanding those content types is super key, because if the person making the content has that list, then they can essentially just go through and make sure they're checking things off and they're not missing anything. The last thing that I like to talk about for live content is talking about whether this is going to be happening live or scheduled. So, oftentimes when we're doing a coverage of live events, we're looking at a few reasons why we'd be doing this, right? A, we want to document our success. Hopefully, the event is successful. We don't always have control over that, but we want to be documenting the event for essentially social proof for other future events, right? But we may also be using this, say, for example, if you've got like a 5-day festival or thing happening, you may be using this to encourage more registration and more attendance throughout the week, right? So that might turn into more of like live posting or sort of just slightly live posting. Maybe someone's creating content in the morning and then posting it in the afternoon. Maybe it's actually live videos. So understanding what you're capturing and when is this being posted? Is it being posted right away? Are you doing a recap a week later to share with people a bit of gratitude about the event? What is the importance of that? I will say in terms of live, unless your goal is to increase attendance or registrations during an event, it's not as critical to post things live as you would think. Um, because people don't know what's happening. So it's more important that the event is documented well and written about well than it is to get it out like super quick. If you are posting live, I would say make sure that you have all the tags pre-planned. So if there are people of importance or things or maybe sponsors you want to tag, make sure the person has all those tags before they go into the event, so that when they're tagging live and the energy is up and everyone is feeling good and running around, they are tagging the right people and that they have all the information they need going into it. So I want to talk a little bit about a year at a glance. So when we're looking at planning out our year, there's a few areas that we really want to look at in terms of how are we planning out this year, right? So we've, you know, thought about some of our live events, we've looked at some of our content pillars, we've decided, well, these are the things that are key to us in terms of how we want to express ourselves and the information we need to get out there. But now we're looking at how does this all fit into the whole year, right? So I would like to define the quarters. So if I'm going to map out Q1 to 4, I'm going to look at what are my key events? What are my launches? When is my facility openings and closings? And what are my seasonal highlights? So if I can understand what's happening for me in an entire year with an organization, then that helps me understand what needs to be happening each month. And oftentimes, when we have months maybe where there's not a lot going on, it's not as exciting, people will see that as an opportunity to like turn off the tap essentially, but social media and marketing is kind of like a train. It takes a bit of effort to get it going. Once it is going, it's, needs less energy to keep it moving, and then it does take some time to wind it down as well. So rather than turning things off, I would just suggest gearing things down if you've got a quieter season. And oftentimes those quieter seasons can be, a really good time to reflect with your followers and your audience on maybe some more value driven content. So maybe you're not asking them to do things, you're not asking them to come visit you, you're not asking them to engage with your tourism experience, but maybe it's you're taking time to maybe share some highlights, share some history, share some of your values, share some of the reasons why you're doing what you're doing, why you exist, right? And giving them a bit more inspiration so that when it does come around to booking, or getting more into an engagement with your organization, that they have still a relationship with you, right? I also think it's really critical for folks to think about what is a lead time. So usually for events and for folks who are organizing events, you're usually looking at like a 2 to 3 month lead time. And what I mean by that is, if you have an event at the end of summer, you're for sure going to want to start, the communications planning. Every event's going to have different, lead time in terms of like the function of the event. But when we're talking about the communications, we really want to think about um, what are we getting for content? How early do we need to start getting that? And then when do we need to start rolling it out, right? And a lot of this will depend on things like, is there registration involved? Is there a cost involved? Is this a free event? Is this kind of a casual event? Is this something where people may have to book time off of work? And so those things will have different considerations, right? In terms of getting that content together, again, there is going to be seasonality, and that sort of leads into the third piece, which is batch and seasonal content. So filming in advance to cover future seasons and then banking assets so that things align. Um, if you're promoting something maybe that's in the middle of summer, but you need to start promoting it in the beginning of spring, you're probably not going to want to start making content in the middle of spring for a summer event. So these are things where you do need to plan ahead, and this is stuff where you'd want to be looking even like a year ahead so that you can bank some of this content and then have it so that when you do need to start doing some of that pre-promotion, you can start getting into that with some of the content that you created the year before. So that's sort of how I look at putting things together at a year at a glance. And then I want to talk about resource management. And this is the final piece. Uh, I feel like I'm giving people a lot of information here, so hopefully there's questions if I've you know had anyone's brain have a little meltdown during this session. But I want to talk about resource management because, again, like I said at the beginning, if if we aren't managing our resources, all of this is really just theoretical, right? All of the strategy and the planning, if we can't actually execute it, doesn't really amount to a whole lot. So with resource management, to me, it's all about delegating roles. I know there might be some folks in this room that are the only staff or the only person in their organization, so delegating roles is quite simple. If you're a larger organization and you're able to delegate things between different people, social media does require, I guess, a few different sides of the brain. So some of it is, a bit more analytical and strategic, and some of it is a bit more creative. I think the intention for me when I'm creating content pillars with folks is that if we can create containers, sometimes people will actually call them content buckets. And I like that visual because it allows people to think about filling those buckets with ideas. But if we're able to be strategic about the parameters around the types of content we want, then that leaves us the opportunity to be creative about what that content is. So when we're delegating roles, ultimately, we really have three roles, right? So somebody needs to create the content. And that could be third party, that could be somebody that's just really good, with doing photos and videos. Again, that could be, harvesting from some shared content that you're getting through maybe like a hashtag contest. But you have to somehow get the content. So someone needs to be in that role. So then we need to approve things. And when we're doing live posting, the approval process, there may be a pre-approval process, or you might have a quicker approval process. Obviously, if you're live streaming, there is no approval process. But it's important that things get approved, right? When you have properly outlined content pillars, it's a little easier because things should be on track by virtue of the fact that you have a bit of a system. But approval process is really important because in most organizations, as freely as information can be shared, people just aren't all in the same rooms and they don't have all the same information. So I always suggest that if somebody is creating content who might be a little more junior, that the approval process happens through somebody who might be in some of the more higher level conversations, just to make sure that something has been missed, or that the tone is correct, or that things are aligning properly. And that approval process can look like a lot of different ways. Oftentimes, it just will look like other things getting uploaded to some sort of a scheduler, or you can do it through even just like Word documents. That's how I do it with my clients. Um, I I personally like to separate the text from the visual, because oftentimes, if there's a really nice picture or video, people will be a little more forgiving with the text. So I feel if we separate it, oftentimes we're a little more critical of the text on its own, and then we can envision it partnered together. Um, the third role is analyzing, and this, in my opinion, should be done by both of the first two roles. So analyzing is really about looking at what's been working, what we might want to try in the future to improve on those things that are working. Um, yeah, and a lot of this too, when we're having our content pillars, we are looking at ultimately creating what I would call a content series. So if we've decided one of our core ideas is talking about maybe visitor experience, and we've decided, okay, well, how are we going to communicate that? And we're going to say, okay, well, we're going to do that in where a thing where we're going to maybe get some audio bites from visitors, because we have an opportunity where we can get 30-second videos of different visitors maybe giving us a video testimonial, right? However you're able to gather that, maybe they go on a zip line thing and then at the end you get a reaction from them, right? So that's the series, is this video testimonial. And maybe you're like, this is great, people love it, we get great response, people share the video, it's an amazing piece of content. Maybe you run that content series for a year and it sort of starts losing traction, or it's harder to get people to talk on video. So at that point in your analyzing process, you might say, okay, why is this working for us? Is there another iteration we can do, or something we can do moving forward that we can replace it with that just works better for us? So that's sort of the cycle of creating, approving that content, making sure all the swear words are spelled correctly, just jokes. And yeah, and then going through the analyzing phase and making sure that it's still aligning, and then moving back to the beginning. So some of the essential tools that I would give for folks, um, you really need some sort of a photo and or video editor. There's no photo that you take straight out of camera that should theoretically be posted straight to your social media. Oftentimes this comes down to really just figuring out what the tone of your brand is. So if you're, wanting to have a really clean and bright look, then you'll want to make sure that some of your editing reflects that. If you want to have something that maybe feels a bit more moody, um, I can't think of any tourism attractions that are moody, but maybe you could be the first one. Just making sure that everything with your photos lines up and feels on brand. Oftentimes, I've had arguments with folks about whether or not you should be like watermarking your photos, because sometimes people will put their logo like in the corner. To me, I think if you've got a strong brand presence, you shouldn't need a watermark. Certainly, if that's something that makes you comfortable, I say go for it. But if your branding is done well and your photos are done well, that should just come across in your photos. A graphic editor can be really helpful. This is also really helpful for things like approval process as well. So having something where you can build out your templates, where you can potentially do all of your content into here and then export it. This is something that's really helpful. I know some graphic designers kind of aren't a huge fan of something like Canva. If you're not a professional graphic artist, Canva is really incredible and does a lot of amazing things. So I think my only thing that I would say with Canva is really explore the brand manager in there. So load all of your fonts, load all of your colors, and if you're going to use some of their templates, make sure that you're taking those templates, but then loading your colors and your fonts in there and moving things around and using that as a starting point and not as just a copy and paste. I think oftentimes people get a little wild on Canva and then they lose some of their brand tone and their brand feel. So it's a great tool, but just keep it on brand. And then content planning, you need some sort of a tool for content planning. Most folks that are working within Meta, I just suggest using the scheduler that they have. It's pretty robust, and you're also able to like pre-buy boosts and things like that if you're boosting some of your posts, which you wouldn't be able to do in other third-party apps like a Hootsuite. Um, it's pretty great. The thing that I like the most about using the Meta Planner, like the scheduler that's inside of Meta Business, is that because it's not third party, you'll never have an API discrepancy. Oftentimes, when you use third parties, there's a few times a year where those things get a little muddy, and then your things don't post because the technology changed or something shifted with Meta, and the API didn't keep up or whatever. So there's a much higher accuracy with posting. Sometimes the meta scheduler does mess up, so you definitely want to keep your eye on it. But I will say too, if you're a brand who's highly visual, and you might be like Instagram forward, I would recommend a program called Planoly. I use that for a few accounts that are just really, really visually driven. It allows me the opportunity to lay things out. And in Planoly, they'll give you an actual visualizer that shows you what your feed is going to look like. I think Meta has one as well, but it's kind of clunky. And the few times I've used it, I didn't really love it. Yeah, so I would say Meta is really stable. Something like Planoly might be good for folks that just want to be able to see what their feed is going to look like for the next few weeks. And that's it. I guess we've come to questions. My gosh, there we go. 15 minutes for questions. I did pretty good.
Yeah, someone is asking about the relevancy of hashtags. Is this still relevant? Are these still relevant?
Ooh, okay, so I literally just made a post about, well, I wrote a post that's getting coming up. So here's the long and short story of hashtags. Um, Hashtags are not going to hurt your posts, but they don't have the same relevance that they used to. So, say 10 years ago, people would use hashtags really to find you, right? So, it was sort of how things, and I'm speaking specifically right now about Instagram. So, a few years back, hashtags were really how people found you, right? So, people would make like, 40 hashtag bundles, and then those would be sort of how you grew your following. Now everything has shifted a lot more towards keyword searching. So it's kind of hashtags are not as used for searchability. They're certainly not going to grow your following. Now people are finding you through keyword searching. So this is the same way if you're writing a blog, and if you're writing a blog and you want people to find your blog, you're going to do keyword rich blogging, right? So this is the same way that you'd be doing on your Instagram posts. So now, if you want to be found, if you want to be more discoverable, I would look up what some of those keywords are that are trending in your industry, if that's the game you want to play, or just make sure you're using keywords that are going to be relevant to your business. Um, For me at this point, hashtags are more of an aesthetic choice. Some of my clients are still quite married to hashtags, so they're not willing to let go of them. So I've got them down to like a little three hashtag stack at sort of like the end of their posts. I don't include hashtags on Facebook because they've never really been relevant on Facebook. So that would be one distinction between if you're cross posting between Instagram and Facebook, is I would remove your hashtags going onto Facebook. So yeah, hashtags are, they're not going to hurt you, but they're not really doing what they used to. So the second question here is, how do you feel about posting every day versus a few times? Is there an ideal? Um, if if you're sort of Googling and looking up, what does the algorithm need to grow? And when we're talking about growing through the algorithm, a lot of times this is geared towards professional creators, right? So this is geared towards folks who want to monetize their channels. When we're talking about social media for business, my whole thing is keep it within your resources. Consistency is always better than quantity. And by that, I mean, don't hire a summer student that's going to post 3 times a day and then they're going to go back to school in September and then suddenly you have no posts. Um, Make sure that you always have a baseline. So when we're working on a baseline, like let's say you've committed to 2 posts a week, if you get a summer student or someone that can help out and suddenly you're able to do 2 posts a day, do 2 posts a day, but never fall below that baseline. Make sure that you always have that baseline of like 2 or 3 posts a week, whatever it is that you've committed to, because that consistency shows trust and it shows professionalism. So in terms of the frequency of how much you should be posting, I think oftentimes it comes down to how much you need to be talking about and how relevant you need to be staying. And also, it's a resources question. But I think unless you're really committing to like hacking the algorithm, which isn't something that most businesses have the resources, or in my opinion, really the need to be doing, I would say post what you have within your resources. Most clients that I work with are posting between, I'd say, 2 to 3 times a week. Are at mentions the best way to go for both Facebook and Instagram? Uh, yes and no. So on Instagram, I'm a big fan of tagging people. So the difference between at mentions and tagging, at mentions would be when you talk about somebody in the copywriting of your post, and when you put the at symbol and then their handle behind, and then it changes colors. So I like doing that if I really need to give somebody recognition, like say for like a sponsor or somebody. But if my intention is to get somebody to share the post or engage in the post, I will typically tag the post instead, especially on Instagram. And there's a couple reasons I do this. When you tag someone, it sends them a different notification than just when you've mentioned them. And it's a slightly more aggressive notification. So it's harder for them to ignore when you've tagged them. Um, Also, if somebody, and businesses don't do this as often, but if you're working with maybe like creators or younger folks, they'll often change their handles often. So if you've tagged someone and they change the name of their handle, the tag will automatically update. Whereas if you've mentioned them, the mention will now essentially be like a broken link. So it won't be relevant anymore, if that makes sense. And then on Facebook, I would definitely do mentions, although I do find sometimes on Facebook it can be a little finicky trying to tag people in your mentions because sometimes it doesn't always want to pull up. But yeah, on Facebook, you'd want to do mention, especially if it's like a sponsorship thing, or if you're really wanting to like, give a shout out to a partner and stuff like that, because that's the place where people are visually going to see it. But I would also say tagging is really important. Don't call the names out. Perfect. Um, what do you mean by keywords? Just having words in your caption. Yeah, so anytime you're doing a caption, any of the words in there that would be considered keywords, and keywords are if you do anything through Google or any other searchable platform. So I think the shift with some of the meta properties is when we think about something like YouTube, that's a searchable platform. So people go into YouTube and they type in, how to build a bed, or how to defrost my car in -40, or right. And so then those keywords then prompt YouTube to pull up content that would be relevant to that. Whereas when we think traditionally of things like social media, with like Instagram and Facebook, it's more of a passive experience, right? We're going to go in, we're going to look through our feed, we might click onto something a friend shared us. So we're not always searching for things. But now, there, with some of the explore page and some of the search features, instead of pulling through things like keywords, which is, or sorry, hashtags, which is how they used to pull things up, now they're searching it more by keywords. So if you're writing a caption, you'd want to be aware of how would somebody be searching for you, right? Like, what types of things might they be typing in to pull up content that's relevant to you?
I think you're at the one that says,
Boost
in terms
necessary.
of keeping in touch with followers, versus sellers, are boost necessary. That's where you left off.
Yeah, so the stat right now is less than 2% of your followers are going to see organic posting. So for most social media platforms, there's an element of what you'd call like a pay to play. So you do definitely want to have some strategy involved for how you want to boost some of your posts. And how you choose to boost things is different. Some folks, I'm working with are more interested in getting some engagement. Other people want to be driving more towards a website that maybe has a different customer journey mapped out there. But yeah, the organic reach, for sure, with a business account, which you should have a business account, is, I would say, at an all-time low. That's not to say that nobody's getting your posts organically, but it certainly isn't like 10 years ago, especially before, when the feed was chronological, because then there was really no algorithm involved. Well, I know some algorithm, but now it's really based on what they think is going to perform and provide value to people using the platform. Is there a good template that you know of or that is available for creating your first content calendar as a base? I don't know that there's necessarily a template. I think what I would say is just, through the conversation we had today, the process would be looking at all of the things you want to create for content. A lot of times, what I'll do for folks, and sometimes people are already doing newsletters or publications, I always say you want to look at a month of content as creating like a mini digital magazine. So what needs to go in that magazine for the month, right? Is there, a client feature? Is there a tip section? Is there, a get to know someone section? Is there a funny part? Is there like a quiz? Is there like a crossword? Is there like an engaging piece? So I think when we're thinking about what that template looks like, I would say, what are the conversations that you want to have with your audience in any given month, and then break that into what you think is a digital magazine that you can publish once a month. And if you're 2 times a week, that's 9 posts, so essentially 9 digital pages of a magazine going out once a month. Yeah, that's what I would say. And the content pillars, how I break it into basic, big picture, and timely, that'll help you make sure that you're not just talking about one thing, if that makes sense. So then the last question I have here is, can you
And
do a whole session on tags, mentions, and sponsorship? That might be a Tamika question.
yeah, that's a consideration for us. Thank you so much for the questions. I think it was quite informative, quite a number of questions, Tyler, for you to answer. It therefore means that people definitely found the session informative,
Cool.
and I'm hoping that they will be able to, will be able to use the practical tools that you have outlined so that they can stay ahead keep themselves organized and just to maximize their marketing efforts. And before we leave, it's almost 11 o'clock. One of the things that you have started on your calendar just to save time. But, if you're in tourism and we want you to be able to market your stuff efficiently, if you haven't started, there's a next step that we want you to take with us at Tourism Saskatchewan. And I want to introduce you to the course that we have that is called Marketing Saskatchewan. And this is all about promoting Saskatchewan tourism experience. That is what the course is designed for. And from this course, you will be able to understand the province's tourism brand, get in touch or know about our travel market segments, the different niche, I would say, markets, and just how is it that you're able to align your marketing efforts with tourism, with Saskatchewan tourism goals. So take a look at that. It's on the Business Hub, and we hope that you'll be able to find this fruitful. Now, as you leave today, please, we want to keep in touch with you. So as we close off today, the survey will be popping up, and we're going to be asking you just to take some time to fill the survey. Yes, if you could go in, let us know what you want us to focus on. I've written this down: tags, mentions, sponsorships. That's something that we want to hear from you, and more as well. What we can do for you in the future just to help you to make your business and tourism in Saskatchewan more robust. Again, if you do have further questions, please do reach out to us at training@tourismsask.com. Thank you again, Tyler. It was a pleasure having you, and thanks to everyone for your attendance.